I realize this is a bit of an impromptu stream, so if there's not a lot of people watching this, then that's probably why. Now, I haven't advertised this. It's really just more opportunistic because it's a Saturday. Didn't really have anything planned. Probably should go out shopping at some point in time, but you know, I still have the rest of the weekend to do that, and at the moment everything's all hunky-dory. So I thought I'd hop on and I would actually do a bit of silicone mold making to cast my Movember 2017 keycap that I had actually sculpted. So now the reason why I haven't actually advertised this in advance is A, because I wasn't quite sure when I would be able to do this, and B, there's actually a stream going on right now which Brian and Huey, also known as Quakums and Man of Interest from Reddit, are actually building some keyboards. Now this is from Top Clack, one of our friends in the community, and I thought, you know, I didn't really want to steal their thunder because at the moment they've got 50 or so people who are watching their stream, and I didn't really want to be competing. Of course, it doesn't really matter because at the end of the day, we've actually got video on demand because this video is going to be available afterwards. So for those who are watching afterwards on playback, thank you very much for coming along and checking this out. Now, the other day I had actually done the sculpt for this. So this is the Movember keycap for 2017 that I've sort of decided on if it's going to actually focus, and I call it the Merv. So it's a homage to Merv Hughes, who's one of the Australian cricketer greats from the days when I was much younger. And of course, I crafted this on the Synth 2.0. So yeah, just using a bit of CX5. Now I've had a blend of about 75% soft and 25% hard, which gave me pretty good detail. So that's what we're going to be playing with. Now the things that you kind of need to take into consideration when you're actually doing a silicone mold and whatnot is obviously your material, your cure time, the size of the mold, the amount of mold material that you're going to need, silicone that you're going to need, and of course your atmospheric conditions, environmental conditions, temperature, humidity, etc., etc. There's a lot of products out there. There's cheap stuff, there's expensive stuff. What I'll be playing with today is relatively cheap. It's from a local supplier, and I will be gravity molding. So I do not have a pressure pot. I don't have the means or capacity for the compressor and somewhere safe, especially with my daughter being around and being so young, and also because it's such a tiny apartment that we have. Now previously, in the past, hey, how's it going, New Gessex? I'm not quite sure if I pronounced that correctly, but if I haven't, my apologies. We'll just have to see how that goes. Yeah, so I have done some live stream video before where I actually casted the keycap, and you would have seen the sort of little silicone mold there, and essentially we're just going to be producing that part of it. Alright, now at the moment it looks like there's just 2 people watching, which is fantastic. Thank you, both of you, for coming along and checking this out. Baking pie, okay, not a problem. Cheers, cheers. Now, what do we need to actually make the silicone mold component? Naturally, you need something that's a container. Now, in the past, when I first started doing this, if you'd sort of gone back in history, I actually 3D printed a case plate for this. Now, this is a bit dirty, it's a bit dusty, but this was my original concept in design and thought, where I had a plate and I had these walls. Now, I don't even know where the walls have gone, but they slotted in and formed the box, the cube, and I would somehow seal it up. Conceptually it was sound and it did work, but it was a lot of work to actually seal it so that the silicone wouldn't leak out. I had used, you know, a bunch of different things to try and seal it up, and I just had kind of underestimated how easy it was for the high viscosity silicone to leak out over time. And eventually what had happened was I just went the same route that everybody else went, which is using Lego, or Lego as it's, I think, meant to be pronounced. Lego, relatively cheap, it's ABS, so it's relatively unreactive to a lot of silicone materials. It's easy to clean, it's readily available, it's just a little bit of investment cost because you just want the plain squares. I have a Costco nearby and they had some boxes on sale, so I actually grabbed one, which allowed me to actually get enough bits and pieces. So that is a bucket of bits and pieces that I use for making my silicone. Now I've got 2 small beakers, I've got a pipette, which is to actually measure my sort of liquids for the activation of the silicone. I've got a paddle pop stick that I've just cut the end off it there, so it's flat and flush, so I can actually scrape my container with. And then I've got just a bucket of Lego right there. And so now what I do, which is a little bit different to what I can say a lot of other people do, is I do not use a Lego base. Now you may see a lot of other videos where people make silicone molds and they do use Lego, but they actually use a Lego base, and they clip the bottom bits in, and then they, you know, attach their whatever it is that they're molding to the base, and it has the Lego bumps, which is really great for registration marks. But because we're not actually making a two-part mold, I don't need those registration marks. And the advantage of using the synth system is the fact that you don't need the two-part mold. This acts as the bottom of that second part. So let's start making the actual mold. So we're up to 4 people, which is fantastic. Thank you very much for coming along. Now, I actually gave these a bit of a rinse because they were a bit dusty before. Obviously, I hadn't actually made a mold or keycap for ages and ages. And you'll see there's bits of silicone all over them as I actually mold this. Personally, I'm not too concerned that it's actually a little bit wet or damp, and there is a reason for it. Now, some people will be very pedantic and they'll be like, oh, you know, you need to dry it off and it should be absolutely dry because it's going to react with your silicone. And that is exactly why I'm not too concerned. The reason why I'm not concerned is because the silicone I use is a condensation cure silicone. So it actually requires the moisture in the air to help it react and actually catalyze. So having a little bit of damp is not really a big deal. I will wipe it down after I build the actual container, and then that way, you know, excessive amounts of water is not going to be an issue. So now we can see that I'm just very, well, I won't say quickly is really the best way of describing it. I'm just getting my way through and forming it. How's the weather where you are? Just went and dropped all my Lego. How's the weather where you are, Baking Pie? As well as the other 3 people who are watching. Is it a nice day? Friday evening? Well, it might be a Friday evening wherever it is you are. Just chilling out at home, that kind of thing. Anybody? Beulah? There is about a 20-second delay on this, so of course I am just talking to myself until people respond accordingly. Yeah, weather's quite nice at the moment. It's winter in Sydney, and it's been moderate this week, actually, not too cold. So, although it is forecast for rain next week, hopefully it won't rain. Well, it's nice to have rain when you need rain, but of course, just not too much rain where we're going to get flooding or anything like that. Now, so I've just gone and formed this very simple box, and you can see that the synth is going to fit right in there without a problem. Nice. And it gives a good sort of outside edge on that as well, because you don't want the box to be right against the boundary of your mold box, of your synth, only because it doesn't allow it to sit in and sink in. And you'll kind of see what I mean about that much later when I might do another video of the casting process again. Yeah, you do want to have that barrier. You do want to have that lip available. So, rain tomorrow, ain't it? It's meant to rain for the rest of the week in Sydney. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's going to rain tomorrow or not. I haven't looked at the forecast since yesterday morning. But if it rains tomorrow, it rains tomorrow. What can you do about it, right? So let's just quickly keep building. Now, so like I said, I'm not using the base. The base is not necessary for the way that I do things, and it will become apparent relatively soon-ish, I hope. But I also want to say that the amount of height that I build in this is also really important too. So I'm just going to build another layer on this and finish up the layer, and we can check it out. The reason is because the height of the actual sculpt itself, the height of the synth all has to be taken into consideration, and you need to have enough depth in your mold box to obviously cover the top of that. And if I drop that in now, it looks like I probably have enough there. So I'm just going to take a ruler and let's just do a sort of rough gauge by eye. I'm just going to use the camera there. So essentially I want to be at least a minimum, well, I suppose if I flip it around that way, it'll be a little bit easier to see. You know, my cap and the synth itself is sitting around 15 millimeters or so. So ideally you want at least 20, if not more. So I'm just going to estimate that to be around 20 mil, which means I need 20 mil, and I know that each one of these Legos is actually just on 9 mil each, if you consider the thickness but not the actual top of the bumps, the locking mechanism. So if I flip that around with 3 Legos, I've actually got just under 30 millimeters, which is plenty of height, plenty of height. At this point, this is when we start to have a little bit of fun with it, because how I actually complete my box is I use masking tape. So whoa, whew, that could have been slightly disastrous. I actually use masking tape, but before I do that, I'm going to put some more extra pieces up here, only because I want to lock down my mold. Now, the locking of the mold is just to try and ensure it's nice and rigid, because as I start to tape it, I don't want it falling apart and sort of moving. So you can see I don't really care about sealing gaps or anything of that nature. It's just simply to add another layer of connection between the Lego pieces so that they don't really go anywhere. Okay, now you'll also notice that there's already silicone all over this, and it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter at all. Because at the end of the day, silicone and silicone, well, either it's going to fuse to itself or not. The inside, you know, there's random flaps of silicone that you can see between some of these Lego bricks. Does it matter? Not really. I can just peel it off. But you might say, well, look, there's cracks, right? There's all these gap spaces. And you can actually see sort of light through them. You probably can't see it through the camera, but I can tell you that there is definitely gap space between them. When I first started doing this, I would actually fill it with Vaseline. So I just got a Q-tip and I had Vaseline, and I would just wipe all over the insides and actually seal up the surface. And then I just thought, no, because it was a pain. It was an absolute pain, and I would actually have to clean that all off afterwards. So I thought, screw it. Not going to do it. And my tape method actually works really well. So I'm just going to put that down. So I'm not going to be at risk of accidentally knocking it over again. And here's my masking tape. So what I do with it, just going to move that aside. I'm just going to flip that over, and I do a couple of layers. Now, of course, masking tape is a consumable, but you know what? It's relatively cheap, and I get really good results. And it does serve a secondary function as well, in that it gives me an adhesive surface to actually stick my mold to. So unlike if I was using, say, an actual Lego base, where I would have to still find a way to stick my synth onto it, I don't have to worry about that with this. So I'm just going to do a bit of overlap with that. And with sufficient overlap layers, the actual silicone never gets through. Of course, you can see that I do give it a good press down as well. So I'm sealing up all the gaps, right? So just like that. Okay. I'm just going to keep on going. There we go. Last one in this orientation. Try and get my edges lined up nicely. And then we rotate it and we do the same thing again in the 90-degree orientation. Now, of course, this is how I do things, and there is absolutely no requirement for you to do it this way at all. So I'm just going to go like that. Now on my bottom layer, I actually go from the outsides and I just go in simply because you'll see the amount of overlap there is actually quite small. But whereas the inner layer, that's where the main interface is to the silicone, you do want to have a bit more sort of layer protection there. All right. And then I'm just going to center it like that. Okay. So the bottom is actually all now sealed. This is actually very well sealed. The silicone itself is not going to come out from that. I'm pretty sure it's not going to come out. And you'll see on the sides, I've also got quite a bit of sort of layering there, but we will actually go around some more. So I actually end up doing this to it, which gives it an excellent total wrap up. Now this is when I do apply a bit of stretch on the tape, and that's why I wanted that extra layer on top to actually lock in those pieces. And because I've had it actually buckle before while I was doing this, and the whole thing kind of broke apart, which really sucks. So I'm going to do that. We've overlapped it, and bam. So my entire mold box now is completely sealed with tape, relatively quick, and it doesn't matter if there's silicone or uncured bits and pieces. I just peel it off, scrunch it up, into the bin it goes, and I'm good to go again if I really needed to. And the structure is actually still holding quite well. So any silicone that actually gets in between the gaps, it'll just sit there, it'll just cure, it's not going to leak outside the box, and the tape holds it. Okay, so that is my box constructed. At this point in time, this is when you would carefully try and center and lower your actual mold in. Not mold, your sculpt, your synth, whatever it is that you are using. Now, where are my tweezers gone? I did have some somewhere. Here we go. Just got a whole bunch of stuff everywhere. So I try to use some tweezers to help me guide my dropping in. Okay, so you can see it's slightly lopsided, but it's not too bad. Ideally, you'd want to get it nice and centered if you can, but that's the beauty of it being sitting on the tape lightly, is I can sort of just pull it up and adjust it, as I'm doing right now. Okay, so that's probably about as centered as I'm going to get it satisfactorily. And then, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to gently press down to make sure I got a bit of tack on that, and then I can flip it over, and then I can sort of rub against the back with my fingers against the two posts on one side to make sure I have good adhesion on that, and then I switch posts, give that a nice firm contact rub. I go over the other side, switch 90 degrees, and I do the same thing. So now, if I upend this completely, you'll see that the actual synth doesn't fall out at all. It's nicely contacted. Now, if you are brave and you're confident in what you're doing, you can also, using the flat end of the paddle pop that I've cut, I'm actually going to press down on the body of the synth as well. I did have incidents before with this when I did it on the older one time where I actually knocked my sculpt and I damaged the sculpt. So you got to have confidence in what you're doing. Otherwise, you're going to end up a little bit teary. Right, so the mold box is done. The synth is there, it's mounted, the sculpt is ready to go. Now you'll notice I have not put any release agent at all. I don't have any release agent in this because, one, I don't think it's necessary. My experience with working with CX5 and the silicone that I use, it retains the features, and because this is designed to be a once-off production for Movember, and it's not a long-term kind of mold slash artisan keycap that I want to be producing over and over and over and over, compared to some other artisans who have, you know, their main staple of what they actually make. It doesn't bother me that when I remove my sculpt from the silicone mold later on, that it might be damaged. So that's primarily it. And also because the really good fine stuff is actually a spray, and being in my apartment, I don't really have anywhere safe that I can actually spray it without potentially mold agent residue going all over the place. So that's primarily why I'm not too concerned about using a release agent. So now we're just going to set that aside for the moment, and we're going to get onto actually mixing our silicone. So we'll move the tape, move the scissors. Okay, we need that. Actually, I forgot. So what you want to work out also is obviously the volume and the amount that you're going to be mixing. Having this box design, we're looking at, it's about 47 mil, and it's about 47 mil, and we want it to be at least 2 centimeters high. Now that means, using a calculator, we've got 47 times 47 times 2. So you're looking at about 44 cubic centimeters? Yeah, 44 cubic centimeters. So now I know that in terms of my silicone, the stuff that I use, it's heavier than water, which means its density is about 1.2. So I'm going to times that by 1.2. So I'm looking roughly about 53 grams worth of silicone. However, that is assuming that my box height that I'm after is actually completely empty. But because the actual mold itself is occupying space, because the synth is occupying space, I don't need 53 grams. So I'm actually going to try and measure out to 50 grams. That said, from experience, I don't even do that anymore, because I actually measure to 50 milliliters. 50 milliliters is actually obviously more than the 44 cubic centimeters, but because the gradations on my cup are actually 25 and 50, if I try and guesstimate in between, it's a bit of a mess. Now this is the stuff that I use, and I mentioned that it's relatively cheap. This is made by Aldax, or it's realistically it's actually rebranded by Aldax, called CraftSil. It's a condensation curing silicone, and it's a 100:5 part A, part B. So this is the part A, and then the actual curing compound is this little bottle, which is the part B. Okay, so that's essentially what I play with, and it's effective. It's effective in doing what I need to do. It probably isn't as durable, it isn't as long lasting compared to some of the other brands, but I also don't pump out the same amount of volume that other makers do. Now, of course, because safety is always important, and also because you don't want to have spills, I've just got a tray that I normally use, and my bits and pieces will sit inside the tray. I've got my grain scales here that I'll be using to actually weigh out stuff, and then of course I've got the pipette that I mentioned earlier, and last but not least, I've got some gloves. So I've just got some nitrile gloves, which I've used before in the other video when I was doing the casting. So there we go. Now, because this silicone is very slow cure, it's a 24-hour cure, it means I don't have to worry too much in comparison for fumes. Now, it does produce fumes when it's curing, but because it's so slow, I can actually take this from in here and out somewhere else later while it's actually still curing. So I'm not too worried. Whereas if you're going to be using some other stuff, it's a little bit more important to have sufficient ventilation. Okay. The curing time is actually 24 hours at 25 degrees Celsius, but because it's winter and it's actually lower than 25 degrees Celsius, it's going to take a little bit longer than 24 hours to be fully cured. Typically around sort of 18 hours, the surface is okay to touch. It's a little bit soft and your fingerprints do kind of like show up in it. Now this is from personal experience and playing around with it, which, you know, you probably really shouldn't, but at least you know that if you accidentally knock it after about 18 hours, it's not going to be catastrophic because it's still not liquid. So what I do is to work out actually how much part B I need to put in, because it's actually by weight, not by volume. I'm going to measure my cup and it's 18.2. So I'm just going to note that down in calculator. So that's 18.2 grams. And then we go about and try and pour roughly 50 mils of silicone. So here's my bottle. Now I'm going to free pour this. If you're not confident, you're not experienced in free pouring, then I would recommend you not to free pour. I would recommend that you use some kind of utensil that you can actually sacrifice, or that will be dedicated for the purposes of doing silicone molds, because uncured silicone, this stuff is it's really horrible. It's very difficult to clean off. It's sticky, it's gooey, it's just, yeah, it's just all sorts of bad. But I'm just going to be very carefully pouring this. All right. So there we go. Just take my time. Thanks very much for everyone who's still here. I see the number of people who've joined us has fluctuated a bit. At one point it actually went up to 7 people. Kind of went back down to 5, and now it's just chilling out at 6. So if you're still here, thanks very much. It's not very much happening in chat, but that's okay. It's a very simple process. I don't know where people are in the world if they're not in Sydney and what the time is. So could be late at night. You could be eating pizza, or I don't know, falling asleep at your desk. Who knows? Who knows? All right, so we're just about to hit the 25 mil point. Now the other thing to be remembering when you're doing a pour like this is there's always going to be material here still on the lip, right? So when you get very close to it, that's when you kind of want to cut off, because any material that you're cutting off is going to end up inside your container as well. Now that's not a problem if you have excess. It's just more of a matter that if you were very frugal with your silicone and your materials, then that's just something to be aware of, because if you calculate down to the dot, you may end up falling short. Okay, so there we go. I'm going to tilt up, and then I'm going to cut that. Oh, almost got it outside. All right. It's very stringy, so you just need to be careful about that. And I'm just going to clean off all the excess there on the surface, so it's not going to be there on the lid. Scrape all of that excess off. Okay. And there you go. So that's my 50 mils. And of course I'm going to close that up, make that nice and tight so I don't have any issues when it gets accidentally knocked over or something by someone. And if I hold this up, you're probably not going to see it very well on that camera, but if I hold up to, oh, nearly had some silicone escape. All right, so I don't know if that's going to focus or not and show you. Probably not. No, the background's too much, but it's just over 50. It's just over 50. So let's turn that back on. Wait for it to be 0. I'm just going to tear that, put that on top, and I've got 80.4. Okay, so at 1.2, 50 mils should be 60 grams. So I'm actually about 2 grams over, which is all right. So what did I say it was exactly? 80? 80.4. Okay, so 80.4 minus 18.2 means I've got 62.2 grams. And because it's a 100 to 5 ratio, it's a 1/20th. I times it by, what's that, 0.05. So I'm actually looking for 3.1 grams of part B, okay? And how I do that is I don't actually weigh it into this, simply because if I'm trying to get it into this, I can't take it back out, right? It's not good practice, obviously, that if you've added into this, you're going to suck it back out. So instead, we actually weigh it against the bottle. Hey, Stephen. Thanks very much for joining. Don't think you've ever been on YouTube while I've been doing a live video. It's actually, what's the time? About past 12, noon? Nearly 2 o'clock. Okay, so it's mid-afternoon, early afternoon in Australia. I'm in Sydney, so wherever it is that you are, then obviously the time zone difference is going to be what you need to account for. We are in GMT minus 10? Plus 10? Plus 10. We're GMT plus 10. So there's my my scales at the moment. So I'm going to tear that to 0, and I'm going to put that on. And then what I'm going to do is, I want 3.1, so right now it's at 103.8. You might say to yourself, why do you not tear that to 0? And the reason is, my scales have an automatic shut off. If it turns off, then I don't know necessarily how much I've got in here. Whereas if I read its actual absolute value, then it doesn't matter if it shuts off. As long as I tear it and put it back on, I always know where I'm at. So if I want 3.1 grams, then I want that to read 100.7. Does that make sense? I hope so. So exactly, look, it just turned off by itself just there, which means I would lose potentially the knowledge of how much I had in my pipette. So let's just turn that back on. I put that back on and it should say, okay, so it's 103.9, very close to 103.8, how it was before. So I want to be looking for 103.7. So, sorry, 107. So I'm down to 2. It's 101.8. So there it goes in. So I want to be taking about a mil. I've taken too much, and I can put that back in. 101, 103, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so, and there we go. So that is all of the part B that I'm actually putting in. Okay, and I'm just going to tap that. Now, ordinarily, if you were working with a very fast reacting material, so a really common starting silicone that a lot of people use, at least in Australia, is Pinky Sil. Pinky Sil is really great, but it actually has a very fast reaction time. It's got a demold time of around 20 minutes, which means the pot life is also really short. I think it's like in the order of 6 to 10 minutes or something like that, depending on the temperature, which means you have to start mixing and then you're trying to degas it or pressurize it straight away. But because I've got a 24-hour cure, I'm not rushed at all. It takes a really long time for this to actually start to firm up. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go and put this in the bin first, because this is probably the most dangerous part if I don't have a waste container available. So yeah. Well, it's great to have you actually catching us live, Stephen. Much appreciated for you coming along. Where are you actually from that the time difference is kind of an issue for you? It's actually kind of funny because the study we're in, my lovely wife here behind me doing a bit of knitting and making something for our daughter to wear, we have a study bin, and ordinarily it's just an open bin, but now because of her age and her desire to explore, it's probably a good way of describing it, she's sticking her hands and whatnot, opening up stuff and getting into it, so we actually have to put a cardboard box on top of the bin to stop her getting inside the bin. Ordinarily, for most part, it's just, you know, normal rubbish, nothing too dangerous. But obviously, small things are always a danger to children because they can eat them, swallow them. And then, of course, there's things like her nappy bin, which is outside that she can stick her fingers in and get dirty all over from, you know, the wipes that we use to clean her up with. Okay, so I've just put those back in the bag, and that way it'll add a layer of protection. Now I can put my scales away because I don't need them anymore, and we start mixing. So you'll notice that the layer of liquid is just sitting on top. It's just, there it is, that clear layer. I'm just going to gently incorporate that in. Now I'm not using pressure, as I mentioned earlier, and this is just going to be purely gravity cast. So I do want to give it a good mix. I want to be able to get even mixing in this, and I can take my time because I'm not constrained by a fast curing silicone. Pros and cons of using a pressure pot. Well, the pros is that you're going to get really good molds. You'll also get really good casts because any air bubbles that are actually in your material is going to be compressed. Do you need to use a vacuum pressure system? Not necessarily. So the thing with vacuum is that it's there to pull air out. But if you're going to be using a pressure pot and you're compressing, it's not really necessary. And if you're working with a fast curing material, you don't even have time to be able to vacuum degas it before you put it into the pressure pot. Now, if I was to actually get something to assist me with this, I would get a vacuum system because I'm not using pressure. You can use both, but if you're not going to pressure cast, then a vacuum system would help because it does suck out the air bubbles. But if you're going to use pressure, then you don't really need to have vacuum, if that kind of makes sense. Kind of repeating myself there a little bit, I know. So you'll see that I'm just stirring in, I'm scraping the sides. So it's always good to have a container that you can actually scrape. And because I had that cut flat bottom on this paddle pop stick that I showed earlier, it means I can also scrape the bottom and get good mixing. Part of the reason why sometimes people who start off making silicone get uneven curing is because they don't do good mixing. They don't mix the sides very well, they don't scrape the bottom, and you end up with silicone that doesn't have the catalyst agent in it mixing into it. And so when they scrape out their container into their mold, you'll get patches of soft, wet, uncured silicone. So you can kind of see I'm actually scraping it hard enough that you can see the bottom before the silicone folds back in. Okay, so just scraping that along. The second thing that's really important, and you'll notice at the start when I said that I have two of these little beakers, here's another one, is because you want to do what's called double mixing. Single mixing can be effective, but double mixing is more effective than single mixing. And all you do is, once you mix it to a certain point and you're satisfied that it's fairly well incorporated, and you scrape and you scrape and you scrape, you move it from one into the other, and then you mix it some more. And this ensures very homogeneous mixing of your silicone. It ensures that everything gets into everywhere within it, and all of that catalyst material just incorporates in very cleanly. Now, Pinky Seal is actually really great because they actually have color dyes in it. So part A and part B, am I thinking Pinky Seal? I think Pinky Seal does it. I know that the Smooth On products have it, where when you get that uniform color, that's when you know that you have really good mixing. So now I've given a good mix, and now I'm just starting to pour it in to my second container. Just going to help it along a little bit there. Rightio. When I first started doing all of this, and I was in the Reddit community, there was actually not a lot of little artisan makers, to be honest. I'm not going to exactly say that I broke ground, because I didn't. But at the same time, honestly, when I was searching around and looking at this, nobody else was really doing it. And then I made a very simple album because over in Keycap there was this excellent thread on about how to do two-part molding. And that's really what I took on, and I just ran with it. So, but then after I started making my horrible dodgy rag caps with all the bubbles and whatnot, and getting criticism from the community because supposedly, I was being disrespectful for thinking that I could offer them caps that didn't meet up to standards and I wanted money for them and all that kind of stuff. A lot of other people started making caps, and it was just really a spread of information, and that people could say, you know what, I can do this too, which you can. And I'm here sharing my knowledge and my experience in how I do this, and this is not necessarily the best way. This is not necessarily the only way to do things. This is just how I do things, and so you can understand and see where I'm at, why my caps are the way that my caps are. So yeah, but since then, I think the community's being a lot more receptive to new guys starting along. There is still a little bit of elitism sometimes when new starters start out, but there's also attitudes from the makers themselves. Some of them are much more willing and open to receiving criticism, which kind of helps them advance and improve, because they talk to the community, they find out what the community thinks, they talk to, you know, well-known, reputable, experienced artisan makers to get their insights. They listen to things like, you know, the Capcast, which Cos and Crytone and Zorb were doing, which focused a lot more on actually creating artisans as well as the artisan scene, compared to, say, like our own podcast, the Board Podcast, and Top Clack. But, you know, the community's out there. So now that I've got most of what I'm after, that's pretty much just going to be sitting there, and it's going to just relegate itself to cure. And then we start mixing the second container. So Stephen in the US, quite a few hours, not to distract you. You can't find our podcast on Google Play Music. I actually don't know if we're listed on Google Play. I don't know how the Google Play platform works, but we use Libsyn as our platform to host. So you can always go to our podcast, which is www.theboardpodcast.com. There is an RSS feed there as well. So if you do have, in particular, a favorite podcast program that you like to use, you can always RSS to that. Or alternatively, whenever we release our episodes, it's always on Reddit as well. So you can find the links there, and there's direct links and there's permalinks to that. I think in our YouTube channel, in the description, it'll also have links for our podcast channel as well there. You're in the US. Well, a few hours apart isn't too bad. It really just depends on if you're on East Coast or West Coast US, or if you're kind of somewhere in between in the middle. Okay, so you see I'm giving it a really good vigorous mix, and I'm scraping. The only thing that I tend to find doing this is it makes your hands really tired, especially because if you're working with small stirrers, the viscosity is actually quite high. You can kind of see, you know, it's kind of like honey-ish, if not worse, depending on the quality of your honey. But for most part, I'm fairly satisfied that that's going to actually be well mixed now. Okay, so I'm just going to scrape off a little bit there, and I want to just let that sit for a little bit, let the big air bubbles out. Now this is where the pressure pot situation helps, because you can kind of see there I've got some really big bubbles and some little bubbles that are starting to form through and come out from all that vigorous mixing. You can do what's called the tap, so essentially you just tap it, tap, and you try and drive it out. I tend to blow on it to pop the bubbles on top. I'm not concerned about splashing, only because of the fact that A, it's silicone, it's quite viscous, and B, I do actually have glasses normally anyway, so they kind of act like safety glasses. But of course, you know, PPE is very important, personal protective equipment, so if you do need safety glasses, then make sure you have safety glasses. Plus, of course, like I mentioned earlier, gloves and well-ventilated spaces. Alright, so still pretty fluid. See how much it's just rocking around and sliding around. And then now we do what's known as the high pour. So here it is. There's our mold box. There's our synth. The standard method is to start in a corner and pour into that same corner and let it flow, because as it flows, any bubbles will come up and break. If you just haphazardly pour everywhere, it's just going to go everywhere. And the bubbles will be trapped and all sorts of shenanigans. Now, because once again, I'm going to be working inside the tray, because if there are any spills and leaks, the tray is going to catch that. So, pretty much, it's time to pour. Now, I'm actually going to use the stick, because I'm going to pour downwards onto the stick, which will kind of guide it into the corner there. How fast or how slow you pour at this point in time is entirely up to you. East Coast US represent midnight. Oh, Friday night, midnight. Well, thanks very much for hanging out at midnight. Not tired? Not a long day? For me, Friday nights is a D&D night, so I play Dungeons and Dragons with a bunch of friends that I've played Dungeons and Dragons with since my school days, actually. We started playing in 1995, so we've actually been playing Dungeons and Dragons on and off over the years for 2 decades. 95, 2005, 2000, yeah. 2 decades, which is pretty impressive. We're scattered actually all over the country in Australia, thankfully not overseas internationally as such, although one of our players, he travels a lot for work, and so we actually use online platforms, which at the moment what we're currently using, which we've been using for many years, is Roll20, which is really great. So that's what I get up to on my Friday night shenanigans. I guess if role-playing is not really your thing, then watching keyboard streams is probably not a bad option either. So you'll see how it's just flowing down. We're getting to about half of the base there, and you can see that there are some bubbles already coming up to the surface there. Camera's not really showing it that great, but that's because the lighting's not fantastic. But I'm just going to keep on flowing that down. When you pick a silicon, you also have to think about what kind of features and details that you want. The lower viscosity silicons are much better at getting into nooks and crannies. You just have to be careful with with overhanging areas, because if you're working with overhanging areas, air bubbles can be trapped underneath there. One tactic that some people do use for when they do molding with overhangs is they'll actually paint the overhang areas with silicon. Now, I have seen this done for larger objects where they'll actually paint with silicon the object before it's put into a mold box and casted. What I mean by that is they're actually layering silicon and letting it cure so that there is no dangerous overhangs where air can actually be trapped under. It is obviously more labor and work, but I don't think for most part it's absolutely necessary with keycaps. However, that said, you have to think about your keycap design. If you have overhangs structurally, also when you cast it and try and take it out of the mold, it means it's actually harder to take out of the mold, and you're potentially going to be ripping out chunks from your mold. And also when you're casting it with your resin, potentially at the same time, there's going to be air bubbles forming in your resin if you don't pressure pot your resin. So they're just things to think about when you actually design something, whether you want overhangs. Little overhangs are probably okay, like bulges and stuff, but big overhangs, that's just something that you have to consider. Hey, how's it going, Zasharis? New Zealand, fairly close. You've been to Sydney once? Fantastic. We're in New Zealand. I've actually only been to New Zealand once myself. I went to Auckland to attend my wife's uncle's wedding last year. So it was a really great time. It was a little bit cool in Auckland, but wasn't too bad. And at the time, the baby was quite small, so she was just stuck in a baby carrier the entire time, which made it really easy to deal with. It meant that we could walk everywhere. We didn't have to use a pram. We actually didn't take a pram or a carrier, like a stroller or anything like that. No car seats with us. We just had rental cars that had car seats in it, and we just used baby carriers the entire time. So it was really great. Central Time, not quite Saturday. The podcast is the only Pocket Cast is still on your phone. Ah, okay. Yeah, well, you can definitely download the MP3s from Libsyn. The direct link allows you to do that. So if you don't want to have apps for obtaining them through that way, that's definitely possible. Of course, if you have any issues, let me know, because if needs be, I can also put them, say, like into a Google Drive or whatnot, but it's not as easy to manage in regards to seeing stats for us to know our listenership and where they're from, and also comments and moderation, and because the Libsyn platform allows us to put episode details and stuff like that as well. So Central Time. So that's going to be like, I don't really know the US geography for central states, except like Minnesota, Great Lakes, Michigan, that kind of area. Is that right? My brother used to live out that way, but then he got a new job and ended up going to Florida. And I don't know if he's accepted or not, but he had a job offer, an interview in Bend in Oregon, just a couple of hours out from Seattle actually. So still have to wait to find out if he's going to take that one. So you can see this is a very slow process, but at the same time you can see how many little bubbles are actually coming up all over the place. And I've almost completely covered the actual sculpt, and I've still got a good probably third of this container, this beaker of silicone. Once the actual silicone flows over all of the sculpt, I can probably go a bit faster because it's not that critical anymore, especially because in the corner and any bubbles that form there is going to be poppable anyway. Now you do want to let it flow over your features so it can actually just work its way into the fine details. If I was to pour that straight on top, I could actually be pushing bubbles into cracks and lines and spaces, which then potentially might not get dislodged. Once again, if you're using pressure, that's not an issue, but with gravity casting, it's really, really important. Remote Ferret, hey, how's it going, mate? Thanks for coming along and checking out the stream. We're up to 12 people, fantastic. Now, for those who've never actually come along to one of my streams, our record is 21, I believe, 21 or 22. So we're actually almost halfway there, well, just over half, which is fantastic. And Minnesota was the first state that I mentioned because that's where you are. Excellent. I've been in Minnesota a couple of times. Minneapolis, St. Paul. My brother used to work for 3M, and I've been to the Mall of America where they have an amusement park inside the old football stadium. That was pretty cool. I've been there in summer and I've been there in winter, so I've experienced both spectrums of Minneapolis, St. Paul. It's got some nice, the Children's Museum's nice, and the Science Museum's pretty cool too. S Inks, you aren't a real mech keyboard enthusiast unless if you have 5 expensive artisans. How do you define an expensive artisan? Is that by trade value? Is that by financial cost value? What's your definition there, S Inks? Now you'll see how I'm starting to do a bit of scraping now. I'm just going to speed this up because I've covered the important part. I'm just going to let that flow down. And it's not really visible right now, but I'm actually getting almost to the top of my mold. So even though I'd calculated for 2 centimeters and we had 3 centimeters of height in this mold, the excess that I managed to pour, the extra 2 grams or so, and the fact that there's the volume from the sculpt and the synth is accounting for that additional height. All right. Hey, James, thanks very much for coming along. Another local. Trade value. I haven't really traded many artisans. I've got Hungerworks Studio ones. Well, one. I've got the Autofile, which was really great. So I suppose that's a high-end one. I've got a crap. I think it's a crap. An Entling. Is that a Zorb keycap? I've got the Book Key. Yeah, you know, I've got a couple. I wouldn't exactly say high-end, only because the whole reason why I got into making artisans was because a lot of the stuff out there in the community didn't appeal to me initially. And a lot of the stuff is nice. I appreciate the artistry in it, but they're just not stuff that I would personally want on my keyboards. So, you know, a lot of that macabre stuff, a lot of that pop culture stuff is not really up my alley. So I don't go for, you know, Reapers and things like that. Things that I do like are lifelikes impressions. So for example, Cherokee and the Rustler from Bro, really fantastic because the attention to detail and that lifelikedness is really cool. I fully support anybody making artisans because it's a challenge. It's a difficult process, and there's a lot of time and effort involved in it, especially both from sculpting, from molding, as you can see, and the casting. Yeah. All right, look at that. Perfect. So I've still got a bit there, and what I normally do is I actually just tilt that into the other container so it'll slowly work its way down into the other container. And now I'm not sure if that's going to show very well, but if I just give it a quick tilt, you'll see it's right up to the edge of that 3 centimeters. You see there? That's perfect, right? Because I got no overflow, I'm not too concerned. And this is when we start trying to pop the bubbles. So I just give it a quick blow there, and you'll see they've all popped, and now they're just going to chill out. So now it's just a process of tap, 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 occasionally giving it a blow, and yeah, waiting. Wow, there's a lot of people happening in chat, which is fantastic. Zacius, no artisans. Well, starting making your own is definitely a way to go into it. Jamie McHenry, thanks very long for coming. Albuquerque, New Mexico. Woo! Fantastic. New Mexico. There's a lot of good food down there from what I've seen, because I've watched quite a bit of Top Chef, and they go down that way, which is pretty cool. Those 8700s, which are these headphones over here. Good quality. They're open backed. They're quite comfortable. The foam on them is really fantastic. However, when I actually record the podcast, I use a different pair of headphones, which is actually over here. They're my ATH 50s. Just seeing, that's pretty much done. So I got some Audio Technica's studio headphones. They're closed, so I get much better sound in regards to actual what I'm hearing, what I'm recording. What else have we got happening in the chat? Hate the new black models, champagne and purple. Well, these were actually given to me by a friend because he was downsizing and he didn't use them. So I didn't even pay for them. Score. Favorite artisans are the breakfast caps. Yeah, really cool, fine detail, eggs. I mean, just being able to cast those colors and those details cleanly is amazing, which is something that I've yet to actually do or master. Only because the resins that I work with are also very slow curing, 24-hour curing, which means for me to do a multi-shot, it actually takes a long time. Some of the other resins and polyurethanes and stuff like that, the plastics that some people cast with, are very fast curing, which means they can do multiple shots in a much shorter time frame as well. Okay, Philip, hello from California. Hey, welcome. Must be getting pretty late in California then. You're probably well past midnight, I guess. The best green chili. Sounds good. So, what is the artisan going to look like? What was the original sculpt? If you're not familiar with what I did last year, I held a sale for fundraising for Movember, the charity. Now, Movember is an initiative for men's health. It was originally started many years ago in Australia to raise awareness of prostate cancer. And since then, it's actually ballooned massively all around the world. And Movember happens in November, and essentially you grow a mustache, you raise funds, they have a party at the end of the month, you can buy tickets to and all that kind of stuff. And when I started getting into the community, I thought, you know what, I still want to fundraise for Movember, but I wanted to get the community involved as well. So I made the first ever mocap last year. And essentially it's just an artisan that has a mustache on it. So I've actually got some left over from last year, which we've been doing as our subscriber giveaways. We're at like 680 subscribers right now. And when we hit 700, I'm actually going to be doing the giveaway for this guy, which is one of the remainders from last year's Movember campaign. So this is a red nose mo. So there's just a keycap with a nose and a mustache on it. So it's an MX style stem fit there. Okay, and you can see the bubbles that I'm talking about because I don't cast with a pressure pot. So this year I wanted to do that again, and the sculpt that is actually being molded in here right now is a Movember sculpt. So it's just a mustache, it's got a bit of a chin on it, and in my video that I released the other day, there's the time lapse of me actually sculpting it, because it took a couple of hours, and I wasn't sure if I could do it all in one sitting. So it ended up being 2 sessions where I actually chopped the 2 videos together and sped it up, because you don't want to sit there for 2 hours or so watching me sculpt. Yeah, 11 in Cali. Okay, so it's not as late as I thought it would be. Who was it that said it was midnight? Oh, it must have been in New Zealand. So yeah, New Zealand obviously in between. No, because you're on the other side. Right, timeline. Yes. Not quite thinking straight there. Fantastic. It needs to be 9 in California because it's 11 here. Okay. I think, is it 3 hours between East Coast to West Coast in the US between the time zones? So as we're talking, you can see that a lot more bubbles came up, and all I've done is just blow on them and pop them. Now, right now, that's pretty much it. Like, the actual pouring is done, the box making is done, the mixing is done, all of that is done. And besides just slowly waiting for bubbles to rise and to pop them as they come and to tap them out and to assist them, we're just going to leave that for 24 hours, 36 hours, 48 hours to fully cure out. And then, of course, there's cleanup and stuff like that as well. There's not really much left to clean up with this. Normally, what I do is I actually put this above my computer because it's a warm area and it speeds up the actual curing process. I don't want to do this with the actual mold here because I want to give it time for the actual bubbles to come out. So the longer it takes to cure and start to firm up, the better, because there's a better chance that the air bubbles come out. If you excuse me a moment, I'm going to actually put this up there so it's out of the way. Alrighty. When will the sale of the Movember caps be? Last year I ran it in conjunction with Cos from Cosmosis, and what happened was we both made a bunch of caps leading up to Movember, and then we ran like a not quite raffle sale, but kind of raffle sale. So you went in the raffle and then you made a donation to Movember, and once we confirmed that donation, then the cap was sent out to you. And Cos and I, between the two of us, ate the costs of shipping as well. So I don't know if Cos is going to do that this year or not. I haven't actually had that discussion. I don't know if there's any artisan makers out there that's going to get involved, but it doesn't really matter because I'm still going to be doing that. I decided to start early this year so I could have more time to be able to cast caps, and hopefully it means that, you know, I could possibly make them a little bit cheaper and more appealing, but we'll see how that goes. And obviously, because I now have a much older, more active daughter compared to last year, she's a lot more to handle. So that's the other reason why I kind of wanted to get started on this early. If I can sort of bank it up earlier, then maybe the sale can go off a little bit sooner, like first week of Movember. I don't know. We'll have to see how it goes. Yeah. And of course, we'll just have to see how the actual mold turns out. If it turns out to be a horrible mold and it doesn't work, then, you know, might have to go back to square one. Okay, it's just popping those. So that's pretty much it for what I wanted to do today with this live stream. I'm not sort of set up to build any keyboards or anything like that. I'm actually still waiting for my TS100 soldering iron that I'd ordered off the internet. I don't know where it is. I don't know where it's going to turn up, hopefully soon. I do have a Let's Split to build. I have a 40% stainless, I think it's the Seabright or the Minorca. It's one of those two. I keep forgetting which one it is. It's the one that doesn't have the split spacebar, I think. And then of course I've got my Delta Split, which I did some videos of already. Now, actually, while we're here, of course, the last time I did a video, I showed the pieces. Hey, Brendan, how's it going? Thanks for coming along. That didn't fit my switches, and since then I have made a post where I showed some pictures where the actual switches now do fit. So this is what the actual fitment is, and I've put switches into the corner, and it's an open style case, which will be pretty cool. For me at least. I know that's not everybody's cup of tea, and I accept that, I appreciate that. I'm certainly not trying to push this into people's faces, but I wanted it to be able to show off the PCB because that's just the kind of wacko that I am. And it took me about 4 episodes of Futurama that I was just watching on YouTube to sand down all the actual switch holes so that the switches could fit in neatly, as well as the mating junction. So I'm going to move this off to one side safely. And then I'll show you that I managed to get the fitment so that the actual junctions fit in, just like that. So that was actually pretty cool. I just used a little metal file, and yeah, it was really only about probably anywhere between 1/2 mil to just under 1 mil on each edge to take off, and it worked a charm. So you can see now I haven't soldered these switches in, but I'm pressing relatively firmly on it, and it hasn't actually popped out of the switches. So they're actually PCB mount. So once they're actually soldered in, I think it's going to be even stronger, and you know, it works fine. I anticipate it to work fine. And then of course I can disconnect them, and then I can still type away. So that's what I'm going to hope to build at some point. But here's the kicker. I wasn't thinking straight, and I thought I had enough switches. These tactile grays, these cherry tactile grays, I originally bought 70 to build a 60% keyboard with, and then that project kind of fell to the side because I was trying to design a PCB. I won't go into the shenanigans of that. And then I thought, it's a 75, so I only need 5 more switches, right? Delta split 75, yeah, 75 switches. No, it needs 86 switches. So I'm actually 16 switches short, which is why I haven't actually come close to starting this build, only because I'm still debating whether if I just get 86 of another switch, try and find 16, which is a pain in the ass to get, or if I'll get, say, 12 of one kind for the F key row, and then the other 4 switches, which are these extra switches on the side here, to be yet another different switch. You know, kind of like the Ducky 711, which has like all sorts of crazy switches everywhere. But, you know, we'll see how it goes. And also, down here, I will be using PCB mounted stabilizers, not plate mounted stabilizers. So I think Hashik had originally asked how the fitment was on these, and I don't know because I haven't tried the plate mount. I'm not going to put in the PCB mounts yet until I actually start doing the build. Philip asks, will I be casting on stream once the mold is done? I would like to. I would certainly like to be able to do that. Whether I can or not is yet to be seen. It's a little bit early to say. That said, because it's a mold, if I can, I will at any given point in time, because I can just redo it. Just keep making caps. The stuff that I cast with, the clear stuff that you saw from this particular cap earlier, once again, it's a 24-hour cure. The last time I did a casting on Livestream, it was a 3-minute, 15-minute cure kind of thing. Sorry, it was a 3-minute pot life and a 15-minute cure time. The problem with that stuff is it absorbs moisture, and where we live, there's actually a lot of moisture in the air. Our apartment has a lot of humidity because the laundry is always up, thanks to the baby, which means it absorbed a lot of moisture. So when I was casting in it, it would produce a lot of tiny little bubbles as the water was boiling off due to the heat of reaction. Thirdly, that particular casting wasn't so successful because the dyes that I have that I use with the 24-hour stuff don't mix well with the polyurethane 15-minute stuff. So that was causing massive bubbles. So I haven't really been able to successfully work with that stuff. It was a little bit of an experimentation. It cost me, it was like $50 or something like that for the amount of resin that I bought. Unfortunately, that's just a waste consideration for me. Experimentation gone awry, but it's just how it is. So, what switches are those? So the switches that I just showed you there in this Delta Split 75, they are cherry tactile grays. I'm gonna put them away. Okay. Do I prefer the feel of a plate or just PCB? I don't mind either way. I have both plate mount and PCB mount. So for example, if you've not really seen a lot of my crazy builds before, just popping those bubbles. This is Ghetto Docs. Ghetto Docs, as the name rightly suggests, is it's pretty ghetto. I actually have DSA Borealis on it, but because my key map is not standard, I've put tape on it and written on it. you'll notice it has no case, it has no plate. Oh, hello. You've woken from your nap, have you? Oh, be careful. You can't pull on stuff, alright? Because otherwise...
Say hi.
Say hello to everybody. I don't know if you heard that, but she said hi. Hey? Hi? You can't come over here. Daddy's got dangerous things. Alright? Yeah. And so it's pretty ghetto because no plate, no case. But you know what? I don't mind that at all. I've got brass feet on it. I've got rubber bump-ons, and you know, and this has got Gator-on greens in it as well. It's quite loud because it's just straight on, and it's got no O-rings as well. Kawaii? Well, she doesn't know the definition of that word yet, so I think it'll be a few years yet before she can try and milk that as much as she can. Now, yes, tactile greys are very expensive. Taobao, I think they're like $1.80 each is what we found the other night. And that's the other half of my Ghetto Docks with a little die sub the board keycap, which thanks to Idea 23, which is fantastic. So, yeah, so that's one of my builds that I've done. I've got a gherkin, which obviously I'd done the other week as well on stream, and that does have a plate. Once again, it's got the greens, it's got cherry greens in it, and it's got DSA as well. So, you know, I have both. I'm not fussed either way, to be honest. It's just different style, I guess. What a sweetie. Daytime, she's okay. Nighttime, she's an absolute beast. She's teething at the moment, so she does wail a lot at night. Now, of course, also there is my little switch, my one switch macro thing that I did a video on the other day as well, from the Sydney meetup that Amtra5 made, and I just designed a 3D printed case for it and popped it in, and then there's the port on the side, so if you wanted to reset it to reset the macro as well. Yeah, so now we're just chilling, just shooting the breeze. I don't know if any of you guys checked out the Top Clack stream of Huey and Brian building their keyboards with the Halo switches from Hata from Input Club. But that was actually primarily the reason why I didn't advertise the stream, because I kind of didn't want to, yeah, sort of jump on their parade, and I needed to get this done while I still could, while Arietti was sleeping. So yeah, been there. Mine's 31. Wow, 31 years old. That's it's a long time ago, isn't it? Long time. She's just on 14 months now, so I think we've still got a long way to go. Don't get into the 60% much. They look cool, but you need your tilde. All right. Well, 60% and tildes. You could always key map a tilde in if you really needed to, I guess. Now, this is my first ever build. It's a GH60 with a inbuilt kind of wrist rest. It's plateless, it's floating. You can see that there. Sits on brass standoffs, and it's an IKEA chopping board that cost me $5. I put some rubber bands on the back of that just to give it a bit of grip so it doesn't slide around, and the USB port on the top as well. So yeah, I guess if you really wanted to, you could always just map a tilde into somewhere if you needed to. So, but alrighty. Bash programming. I'm not much of a programmer. I'm pretty bad at programming. I've tried a little bit before in my life, and I could not program to save anybody's life at all. Okay. All I'm going to be doing now is just periodically blowing these bubbles as they come up. So I don't know if you guys want to hang around and just chill and chat, ask me questions. Otherwise, I might wrap it and let everybody go off and do their respective things. So S-Syncs, You have all these keyboards, but it seems you use that 104 the most. Anything special about it? No, there's nothing special about it. It's just a stock Philco MX Blue. It's a Magistas 2. I use 104s predominantly because of work. I work... Brendan, your keycap hasn't arrived. Well, that's not sounding very good. I definitely sent it, so I do hope it gets to you very, very soon. Unfortunately, with Australia Post, I don't really have terribly much control over that. I did send it untracked, only because the cost of tracking would have been quite horrendous, to be honest. But I do hope it gets to you very, very soon. So I use the 104s because of work. I do a lot of numbers, and so I need the numpad, and because I actually do work from home from time to time, I essentially just do that. My table is actually quite cramped. It's very small. It's crap everywhere, and so to unplug and plug and change out keyboards all the time is quite a challenge. I would probably use a 75 plus a numpad, which is why the Delta Split 75 is really of interest to me. But I still need to get a numpad. I don't actually have a numpad kit right now. I have been looking on Taobao, but none of the kits on Taobao actually are to my liking. I've been waiting for Nice and Creamy's CLZ pad that he had been designing for ages, and he still hasn't actually released it. So if I do get a numpad out there, then it's something that I would probably consider. Now, you've said, have I considered the joys of a 96 key layout? I haven't bought a 96 key layout. I was thinking about buying the Welfare 96. The only thing is, because of my old dog habits, I prefer to have the 2U for the 0 on the numpad instead of the 1U, and that's really the only major reason. I would certainly like to try a 96. I just haven't got around to that. Didn't have the money to get on the kit to buy it. So I don't know if anyone wanted to actually donate me a 96 kit to build, or a 96. That would be pretty cool. I did actually like the 9800, the Leopold 9800C, because I do like my Leopold 660C, which is really great. I've taken it traveling. I took it to New Zealand, as a matter of fact. Fantastic. But it's $280, something like that. So it's a little bit cost prohibitive right now for me to get that 9800. What entices me about the CLZ pad? I think it's meant to be fully programmable, and also because it's supporting somebody in the community. I don't know if a lot of people have made full-blown numpads. I know that there was the Rama, the M10, but the thing about that is it also doesn't have that 2U option, as well as the other keys around it. So having the operators, obviously that didn't show up very well on the camera, but you know, your plus and enter, because I do a lot of number stuff in Excel. So yeah, that's pretty much why. At work I have a Ducky Legend, and I guess, you know, if I did have the numpad option, I was thinking about getting a Ducky Pocket, but I kind of decided against that as well, only because of cost at the time, and I wanted more stuff that I could actually just build and customize and enjoy building, rather than just buying straight out OEM stuff. So yeah, contact New Zealand Post. Well, hopefully they'll actually be able to help you out, because it'd be pretty sad if that keycap did get lost in the post. Have I found my favorite switch yet? Considering that I haven't tried every possible switch out there, I have to say no. I am a big fan of the clickies, and I do like tactile. I bought the tactile greys that are currently mounted on the Delta Split because I wanted to try tactiles a bit more without the click. I did have one lone Zelio, and I put that into my switch tester, and then I lent my switch tester to somebody in the community, and I still have not got it back. I've made multiple attempts to sort of try and arrange a time, and they haven't been very active on Reddit for the last couple of months now, which meant my switch tester is pretty much gone to the winds, including my Zelio plus some of my other switches. That said, for example, Bus Gamer was really cool, and he was nice and kind to actually send me some of the new Kale switches. So I've got a bronze, a copper, and the Kale gold here, and they're very tactile, quite clicky. you can definitely hear the clickiness of those. And well, that one's more tactile sound than actually clicky. But what's interesting between the gold and I think it's the copper or the bronze, I can't remember which one's which, is the pitch is very different between those three clickies. So I'm not sure if it's just because my fingers aren't very sensitive or not, but I don't actually feel that they're scratchy at all. They're not as scratchy compared to say like a Fosen switch. The Fosen's actually, I feel that's much rougher. So I do have like a itty bitty switch tester over here, where it was the Cooler Master V2, which had the top ray one, which is now stripped. But there's the Fosen, and the Fosen I feel is actually pretty scratchy. And then I've got a Razor Green, which is about the same kind of category as the Fosen, and I've actually got a Vintage Black in there, which is it's pretty nice actually. That Vintage Black. Okay. Anything else? What are we going to just chew content over? Otherwise, you know, more than happy to. Cool little pad. It's the Cooler Master V2, which I don't know if you can still get it or not, but I got it initially because I wanted to try the single Topre switch to see how the Topre felt, and then as a result of that, I now have my Leopold, the 660C, and I've also got a HHKB Pro 2, and I've also got an Overtouch. So, whoop, just lost one of my keycaps on an Overtouch. So, yeah, so I've got some of the major top ray options out there. Now, I know that my co-host, the Sochetta, was on Top Clack the other day, and they were talking about our anniversaries and birthdays for our respective shows. And to set the record straight, Kevin, and of course Brian and everybody else, the Board podcast was started on the 23rd of August last year, but we actually released the episode on the 24th of August. Whereas Top Clack was a week later on the 31st of August. So we just squeezed in and pipped them, which is quite funny. So we will actually be coming up to our 1 year anniversary. I don't know if we're going to be able to do anything special for it, but we might do a live stream episode either the week coming up to it or the week after. I'm not sure how the timing's going to work yet. So do I prefer Top Ray over normal MX style? Yes and no. I do like the feel, but there's no click. The tactile response is quite nice, but the audio feedback for clickies, I also quite like. I do like the thock of my Leopold more than the HHKB because the steel plate in it is a nicer sound to me compared to the plastic shell of the HHKB. But clicks at the end of the day for me still are number one. If I could get a top ray with a click, then that would start really pushing up that feel in regards to the tactility, but we're not quite there yet. So, looking for your first build PCB made by my own modular synth, so wouldn't have guessed that this topic would be so involved. Well, keyboards are very involving. When I started getting into keyboards just over 2 years ago in 2014, getting back into keyboards, I suppose. I didn't think I would be here 2 years later doing live streams, having a podcast, making my own bits and pieces, building it. I thought it would just be, I'd buy a keyboard and that would be it. And no, so we're still going. Otemu Browns. I've only actually tried Otemu Blues. So Otemu Blues in the pluggable TKL that I reviewed ages ago, which you can find in the list of videos on this channel. Very clicky, like they are extremely clicky in sound. Very clicky. Top rate isn't the best. It's not so much as best or worst. That's just not how I rate things. you know, there isn't one necessarily better or worse. It's just personal preference. So top ray, I do enjoy the feel. They're very responsive switches. They're nice to type on, but I'm not going to necessarily say one is better than the other. It's just personal preference. For me, the click response, letting me know that I've successfully actuated on that, is really what I prefer. Since I like clicks, send me some SMKs. You don't happen to be the same one in the Australian MetKey Discords who's got all those SMKs, are you? Because, you know, I did say about getting enough to do my 40% build, right? Oh, you've already contacted New Zealand Post. Do they operate on a Saturday? Because Australia Post certainly doesn't. Automo blues feel so damn heavy. Well, I actually quite like greens. I quite like heavy switches, so I don't think that's really an issue. Now, it's funny we're talking about heavy switches and whatnot, because at the moment I'm using this pluggable mouse. Previously I had a Logitech mouse and the left button was starting to chatter and double click on its own. At work, I've actually broken 4 Dell mice in 12 months. The left button chatters or double clicks, and you can actually visibly see that the height of the button is lower on the left click than on the right click. And our IT person was just like, what are you doing to these? And I'm like, I don't know. And maybe it's just because I prefer the heavier switches, or I'm a heavy-ish typer. I don't hammer away. I'm not like keyboard warrior, boom, 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 boom. But maybe it's just finger strength. So, because I've done a lot of activities in the past that use a lot of finger strength. So archery, drawing heavy bows, as well as like fencing, strong grip for controlling the foil and epee and saber, and also kendo, so having 2 hands on the shinai and making strikes. So I wouldn't say that I'm super muscular, but I think I've got relatively good tone and control, so finger strength might be interesting. Who knows? Maybe that's why I'm killing him. But at least this pluggable mouse hasn't died yet, and I'm looking to get my own mouse to take to work, and I'll just claim it on tax because it's going to live at work the entire time. I'm just sick of breaking mice and then having to go to them and go, look, this is a piece of crap, because I'm double clicking everywhere when I'm trying to work. He is. Okay, so he's the same gentleman. Fantastic. The board itself is completely stock Drevo Typhering. Okay. I actually contacted Drevo, and I was hoping that they would be able to, you know, hook me up with some stuff that I could review for the channel, but they actually told me Tay Keyboards is pretty much there. They've got it. And I've mentioned it before, and, you know, Andrew's fantastic from Tay Keyboards. I have no grudge on him at all whatsoever. It's so much so that he has so many keyboards coming in that he has to say no. He actually has to pick and choose what are interesting to him to review. But the companies, obviously, you know, they go for high visibility because he's got thousands of subscribers compared to less than 700 for this channel right now. So maybe in a couple of years, if we grow nicely, we might have a chance of actually getting in with some OEMs and saying, hey, send us some stuff, we can review it, help you get your product out there. Of course, with constructive criticism, you'll notice that anything that I talk about or review, I don't pull punches, in the sense that if I think there's an issue with it, I'll talk about it, because that will really help consumers understand what is with the product, and the companies need to understand constructive criticism helps them get better products as well. They might not be able to afford to make the changes, or they might not be interested, but at the end of the day, it's for the betterment of everybody, right? As long as your constructive criticism is very objective and not subjective. Okay, open your spam folder and it's all from Trend Micro. Well, sounds like they're trying to get on board and virus protect your computer. And S-Inks, yeah, thanks very much for coming along. So I think people are starting to drop off now, because obviously there's not very much happening. It's just a bit of a Q&A right now. The rate that the bubbles are actually coming up is also slowing. And you can still see, as I'm tilting this around, it's still quite liquid. So for the next, you know, hour or so, I'm still just going to periodically just keep watching the bubbles, and I'm just going to keep blowing them out. And that's gravity casting to a dot. What is my nick is usually Light Blighter on all keyboard sites. Okay, Cool. Thanks for letting me know that, Jamie. I don't know if I'm necessarily going to be able to remember that, but if I do and the connection happens, that'd be fantastic. And Brendan's saying, what setup do I use for streaming? So I have two Logitech cameras, obviously. There's the one on the desk and then there's the front-facing one. They are both C910s. I wanted to get C920s, but I couldn't find them cheap anywhere. And both of these I actually bought secondhand. One off eBay and one off Gumtree. So I was pretty lucky with nabbing one of them for $50 and the other one was, I think, $70. I know that Ski with Pete from One Up Keyboards, he's actually got 5 cameras now for his setup, and a bunch of them are C910s, 920s, and he's also got an actual video camera, and he's got a 4K camera now as well. But he's got things like the solder cam, which is pretty cool. I would love to be able to upgrade my cameras, like 2K, 4K would be fantastic. And how I've got it actually set up is just really dodgy. So now I'm going to just pick up this front facing one and I'll swing it around so you can kind of see what I mean, in that there's the microphone and I just have this clamp which is just holding the top one down, and you can see it's just a gooseneck which clamps to my old computer that I've got sitting behind, and then off to one side you can actually see my 3D printer as well, with the stands that I use to hold up my spools. And yeah, there's my microphone and the boom that it lives on. So that's the setup that I have for doing my streaming. He's got a couple of brios. Yeah, okay, he made a kit page. Pete's really good with that because in his videos he's got a whole pile of links in the video description which explains like where all of his bits and pieces are, like, you know, from his quad hands, his soldering iron, you know, his little caddy and where he buys and stuff. Obviously that's a lot of work, and because, you know, I don't have anything like that going, I'm more just piecemeal as things go by. And of course up there in the corner above my printer, my normal printer, which the microphone's kind of hiding, you can see my quad hands and my spool holder, my soldering iron spool holder and all that kind of stuff. And behind me, under that pink thing over there, is my well, it's our sewing machine that my wife and I use for making clothes for the baby, as well as sleeves and stuff like that, which I make to help fund our costs for running the podcast, because, you know, we have a paid host now. Well, we've always had a paid host, just so that we can bring you content relatively advertising free without any restrictions, and you can go back our entire back catalog whenever you want and listen to whatever you want. So, but, you know, I think we've been doing all right. We've had a lot of donations over the year, which has helped cover a lot of the costs. But recently that's kind of petered off. But, you know, it's a hobby. It's money that I put in, that Kevin puts in by posting caps to people around the world. He paid for the board keycaps that we do in our giveaways and stuff like that, which is just part of what we do. Hey, White, thanks very much for coming along. You kind of missed almost everything, actually, so it's a bit unfortunate if you did just join us. The 104 on my desk is a Philco Magis Touch 2. It's got MX Blues in it. It's got the Ninja caps. I bought it second hand, and the guy who sold it to me had actually taken off all the keycaps to put another key set on, but when he sold it to me, he put the stock ones back on, and he couldn't find some of them, so he had to get some other random ones, which is why not all of them are actually front-facing. It doesn't bother me, but it's funny because some people look at it and go, what the heck's up with your keycaps? Why do you have Z and the right bracket as normal caps? So, yeah. Just bought a HHKB. Welcome to the club. Now, what kind of sleeves are they? I normally do 60% sleeves, but I've also done more than 60% sleeves. So, what I can do is just open that up, head over to my imager, where I've got albums. I can go to my albums, and then let's just share my monitor. Whoa, wrong one, my bad. There we go. That was a bit trippy, wasn't it? Wrong monitor. So for example, you know, I had a sale where I had some Star Wars sleeves. I did some TKL ones by request. That was a custom sizing one. They were the ones that I had pre-made, so some 60% Star Wars material ones. it fits both the 65, and there's still a little bit of space above that as well if you wanted to go with higher. You know, I did the little 40%, which my gherkin is currently in, so it fits a vortex core, which is pretty nifty. I've done some custom ones where, you know, I had multicolors and patterns. I've done stuff with actual Velcro flaps instead of a pull cord, so there was actually a pocket for putting a USB cable in. I'd done one to match light cycle, so this was a custom request. Somebody wanted to have light cycle, and that was just for fit, and you can see it actually fits the full size in that. Yeah, so I've done a whole bunch of different sleeves, as you can see, over time. So now, of course, I've just covered up my chat there, so I can't actually see if there's any comments, so I'm just going to nuke that window again. There we go. Ghetto, and it looks really cool. Yeah, it's pretty ghetto. Nobody taught me how to use a sewing machine formally. I kind of made a plan, and I made a sleeve, and it worked. And so since then, I've just been making sleeves and trying to improve my processes to get better sleeves. And for example, the one that my HHKB lives in is one of the first ones I ever made. So I've got Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on one side, and then I've just got like this camo material on the other side, and it's got a pull cord, and yeah, it's fleece lined. So all of the ones that I make are typically fleece lined, which is, it's a simple construction. Takes a little bit of time to measure out and cut and sew and all that kind of stuff, but yeah, I do them from time to time when I've got a bit of free time and I'm inspired to make a sleeve, and also when I need pocket money to actually pay for keyboard stuff. That said, not everything sells straight away or immediately, and I gave away some of my leftover sleeves at the Sydney meetup, for example. So other things that I've done, for example, I've done a dust cover. I'd done 2 of these, and I gave one of them away as well at the Sydney meetup, but this was just a panel that of superhero stuff. Nobody was interested in buying it at the price I was asking for, so now I just use it here to cover up my mixer that I have for this microphone setup. So, you know, little things like that. I've done keyboard covers as well for one particular gentleman because they wanted that instead of a sleeve, and had like a white stripe that ran across it so that it would match one of their key sets as well. So, okay. Anything else? Any other questions while we're here before I wrap up? Go and have a bit of a late lunch, I think. Anything? Obviously, there's the time delay that I'll just wait for and check out some of these bubbles. So, see if it'll focus and resolve on that. Yeah, so see how there's all these tiny, tiny little micro bubbles starting to come up? All the big bubbles have obviously gone by now. So, just end up blowing on them, and then what that does is it just pops the bubbles, and they'll slowly just fill up over, and then more tiny, tiny little bubbles will appear in their place. And we just keep doing that for quite a while. All right, Jamie, thanks very much for coming along. Adios, and yeah, love your support. If nobody else has anything else that they want to chat about, ask about, throw ideas, yeah, don't have nearly as many bubbles in your mold. What material are you using? What's the actual silicone medium that you're using? Is it a smooth-on product? I don't know what the viscosity is like as well, so that might be an issue. Well, not really an issue, but that might be a cause for it. Plus the temperature, smooth-on. Okay, so yeah, I'm not terribly surprised. Different formulations obviously have different characteristics. Smooth-on is quite popular. It's just relatively expensive by comparison to this cheap craft seal stuff that I use. So yeah, and yes, so you Remote Ferret, you had asked about dyes the other day. So while we're actually here, and I am of course streaming, I'm just gonna carefully open my drawers. So just gonna, where am I gonna move that? I'm gonna move that over there. This is my box of dies. So I went on eBay and I bought a whole bunch of dropper bottles, and these are the PSTF dies that I use. So you'll see that's bright orange, and it's just got a dropper, so I can actually count and control how much dye that I'm using. So there's lemon yellow, there's 27 colors in here. I've got turquoise. The actual bottles that they came in were these guys, just PSTF dyes, transparent dyes, and they had these little dripper tops, which you won't see because I've pulled them out to get them into the bigger bottles. But the dripper dye, the dye drippers were really hard to control with. I would upend it to try and get a couple of drops out, and a whole pile would come out. And in the end, I got so frustrated, I just invested and just bought. It was like $20 for all these glass bottles with the actual droppers on them, and it just made life so much easier. I just used a pair of pliers, popped the top off those little bottles, and then poured them into here, and problem solved. So you will notice that it does actually say in here that for use with urethane, epoxy, and polyester. Polyurethane that I use doesn't like this. You mix it in there, and the water content in this PSTF actually just goes haywire, and it produces heaps of little bubbles, and you end up with a crispy rancor. So that is why I can't really use that polyurethane with these dyes. I've tried it, I experimented, and not much that I can do. That's just how it turns out. So yeah, that's my dye collection. Rightio. I think that's it. Thank you very much if you're still here checking out this video stream. There's still apparently 6 of you guys. So if you're from start to finish, awesome. For spending an hour and 40 minutes with me, really, really appreciate it. And of course, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please do. If you like this video, hit like, and of course you can always share the video on demand afterwards as well. You can bookmark it if you ever want to get back to it to just have a look at how I did the pouring and mixing and making this box. And as you can see, it's been probably about 40 minutes now, and there's no silicone leaking anywhere outside of this tape, and it's still quite fluid, right? So because I can tilt it and you can see it sort of just bulging and rolling around. Okay, it's starting to sort of firm up now, because when I blow on it, you can sort of see it's leaving craters, and the craters are slowly coming back. So it is actually starting to firm up. Rightio. So I think we're going to wrap that before it takes even longer and more of you guys' time. Early evening, late evening, early morning, early afternoon, whatever it is, wherever you are. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it coming along, checking out the video. And of course, when we do hit 700 subscribers, I will run that giveaway for that red-nosed Movember keycap. Okay? And yeah, we'll be recording a episode tonight, hopefully, with my co-host Kevin, also known as The Cheddar on Reddit, and that'll come out sometime on Sunday, Sydney time. Rightio. So as always, until next time, happy clacking. And now I have to wait because of the delay, because if I actually hit stop, it gets cut off, and then you guys don't get to hear the entire catchphrase. I can't remember what the delay was, but I think it was something along the order of 20 seconds. So as soon as numbers fall off, and maybe somebody says in chat that they've heard the end while I'm still ranting and rabbiting, then I'll hit the stop button. Still 4 people. Still no comments. I think it's probably safe to say that the end of the stream has occurred. Yep, it has. I've just seen it on the screen, so hooroo.